Welcome to Gripping Tales. Are you ready for today's video? It starts now.
Hiking trails are supposed to be peaceful, a place to disconnect from the chaos of modern life, to breathe clean air, to find solitude in nature. For most people, the biggest concerns are weather, wildlife, or getting lost. But sometimes, the most dangerous thing you'll encounter on a trail isn't a bear or a rattlesnake, it's another person. Someone who's been waiting on that isolated path. Someone who knows that out here you're miles from help with no cell service, completely alone. Someone who understands that on a remote trail they can be whoever they want to be, do whatever they want to do, and no one will hear you scream. Tonight I'm sharing 6 true stories from hikers who encountered strangers on trails. Strangers who made them realize that the wilderness isn't always the most dangerous thing in the woods. These are accounts from people who trusted their instincts, who ran when they needed to, and who barely made it back to tell what happened. Not everyone who goes missing on hiking trails gets lost. Sometimes they're taken. And sometimes the people who make it back are the ones who recognize the danger just in time. Let's begin. This story comes from Sarah Mitchell, who is hiking alone in the Adirondacks in upstate New York in the summer of 2019. Sarah was an experienced hiker, 32 years old, physically fit. She'd done this particular trail, the Indian Head Loop, at least a dozen times. It's a moderate, 6-mile loop with beautiful views, popular but not crowded on weekdays. She started around 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The parking lot had only 2 other cars. Perfect. She preferred hiking with minimal crowds. About 2 miles in, ascending toward the first lookout point, Sarah encountered a man coming down the trail. He was probably in his 50s, average build, wearing hiking gear that looked new. Expensive boots, a pristine backpack, professional-looking camera around his neck. He smiled as they approached each other. "Morning, beautiful day for it." Sarah returned the greeting and moved to the side to let him pass. Standard trail etiquette. But he didn't pass, he stopped. "Hey, I'm doing a photography project on Adirondack hikers. Would you mind if I took your photo? Natural light here is perfect." Sarah felt an immediate discomfort but couldn't articulate why. The request seemed innocent enough. Photographers did this kind of thing. But something in her gut said no. "I'd rather not," she said politely. "But thanks anyway." His smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "It'll just take a second. I've been getting great shots all morning. You'd fit the series perfectly?" "No thank you," Sarah said more firmly. She moved past him and continued up the trail. She felt his eyes on her back, felt him standing there, watching her climb. She didn't turn around, just kept walking, her heart rate increasing in a way that had nothing to do with the elevation. After about 50 yards, she glanced back. He was gone. She breathed easier and continued her hike. The view from Indian Head was spectacular as always. Sarah took her own photos, ate a granola bar, enjoyed the solitude. By the time she started her descent on the loop's far side, she'd nearly forgotten about the photographer. Then she saw him again. He was sitting on a boulder about 30 feet off the trail, partially obscured by trees. His camera was aimed at the trail, aimed at her. Sarah's blood went cold. This was the opposite side of the loop from where she'd encountered him. For him to be here meant he'd either sprinted around the long way, impossible given the terrain and time, or he'd known a shortcut, known where she'd be. Their eyes met. He lowered the camera slowly, that same smile. Sarah didn't say anything. She turned and started walking quickly down the trail. Not quite running, but close. She heard movement behind her, footsteps on the trail. He was following her. Sarah broke into a jog. The trail was rocky, uneven, dangerous to run on. But she didn't care. The footsteps behind her sped up too. "Hey!" his voice called out. "Wait! I just want to talk!" That's when Sarah ran. Full sprint, as fast as the terrain allowed. She'd done trail running before, knew how to navigate obstacles. Behind her she could hear him crashing through the underbrush, no longer staying on the trail. Her mind was racing. She was still 3 miles from the parking lot. 3 miles of isolated trail, no other hikers visible anywhere, no cell service this deep in the mountains. She ran for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 minutes. Her lungs burned. She risked a glance back. He wasn't behind her anymore. The trail was empty. Sarah didn't slow down. She kept running, certain he was cutting through the woods to get ahead of her again, to cut her off. A half-mile from the trailhead, she finally encountered other hikers, a family of 4 heading up. The moment she saw them, her legs nearly gave out from relief. "Are you okay?" the father asked, concerned. Sarah, gasping for breath, told them about the man. The father immediately pulled out his phone. No service. They decided to escort Sarah back to the parking lot. When they reached the trailhead 15 minutes later, the parking lot had changed. One of the 2 cars that had been there that morning was gone. A different vehicle, a white van with tinted windows, was parked at the far end. Sarah's car was untouched, but something was on her windshield. A photograph. It was a picture of Sarah, taken from behind, ascending the trail that morning. Written on the back in neat handwriting, "Next time." The family called 911 from the ranger station. Police responded, took the photo as evidence, searched the area. The white van was gone. They checked traffic cameras on the access road but found nothing useful. The investigation revealed something chilling. 3 women had reported similar encounters with a quote-quote photographer on various Adirondack trails over the previous 2 years. One woman had agreed to let him take her photo. She received prints in her mailbox 2 weeks later. Photos she'd posed for, but also photos of her at home, getting into her car, at her workplace. All taken without her knowledge after their trail encounter. That woman had filed a restraining order, but the man was never identified. The photographer had never been caught. Sarah stopped hiking alone. She sold her car and bought a different one. She never felt safe in the old one, knowing he'd been that close to it, knowing he might have followed her home. She still has the photograph. Police kept it as evidence but gave her a copy. She keeps it as a reminder that her instincts that morning were right. That the discomfort she felt during that first encounter, the feeling she couldn't articulate, was her subconscious recognizing danger. Sarah wonders sometimes what would have happened if she'd agreed to that first photo. If she'd stopped, posed, smiled, would he have let her leave? Or would she have become one of those hikers who goes into the woods and never comes back? The photographer has never been identified. For all Sarah knows, he's still out there, still hiking trails, still carrying that camera, still looking for someone who says yes. Most people who hike regularly will tell you that solo hiking requires awareness. You watch for wildlife, you check the weather, you tell someone where you're going, you prepare for the dangers you know about. But there are dangers you can't prepare for, dangers that don't appear on any trail map, dangers that look like just another hiker until it's too late. This next story comes from a man who learned that sometimes the friendly stranger asking for help isn't actually lost. Sometimes they're hunting. This story comes from Marcus Chen, who was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail section near Crater Lake, Oregon in September 2020. Marcus was doing a multi-day section hike, carrying full camping gear. He was experienced. He'd done portions of the PCT multiple times over several years, working toward eventually completing the full trail. Day 2 of his hike, around 3 p.m., Marcus encountered a man sitting on the trail. The man appeared distressed, was wearing inadequate gear for the conditions, sneakers instead of hiking boots, a light jacket, a small day pack. "Thank God," the man said when he saw Marcus. "I've been lost for hours. My group left me behind and I can't find the trail back to the parking lot." Marcus's first instinct was to help. That's what hikers do. You help people in trouble. But something felt off. Marcus had passed the main trailhead parking area 8 miles back. He hadn't seen any other hikers all day. And this section of trail was clearly marked. You'd have to actively try to get lost. "Where did you start?" Marcus asked. The man gestured vaguely. "Back that way somewhere. We were doing a day hike, but I stopped to tie my shoe, and when I looked up, everyone was gone. I've been walking for like 3 hours." Marcus's discomfort increased. The man didn't seem exhausted or particularly worried for someone claiming to be lost for 3 hours. His clothes weren't dirty. He had no water bottle visible. "Do you have a phone?" Marcus asked. "Dead," the man said quickly. "Do you have service? Can you call someone?" Marcus checked his phone. No service, as expected. They were miles from any cell tower. "Okay," Marcus said carefully. The nearest trailhead going south is about 8 miles back the way I came. North, there's an access point in about 12 miles. Where did your group park?" "I'm not sure," the man said. He stood up, and Marcus noticed he was taller than Marcus had initially thought. Bigger. "Maybe you could walk with me back the way you came? Help me find it?" That's when Marcus noticed the man's backpack. It was partially unzipped, and Marcus could see inside. There was a length of rope coiled neatly inside, and what looked like duct tape. Marcus felt his stomach drop. People don't bring rope and duct tape on day hikes. Not innocent people. Not people who are actually lost. "You know what?" Marcus said, keeping his voice casual. "I actually have a satellite communicator in my pack. Let me grab it and we can call for help." It was a lie. Marcus didn't have a satellite device, but he needed to create distance. He started to take off his pack. The man took a step closer. "That's okay," the man said. His voice had changed. Flatter. The distressed performance was gone. "Why don't we just walk together? I'm sure we'll figure it out." Marcus made a decision. He didn't take off his pack. Instead, he said, "Actually, I just remembered. I saw a ranger about 2 miles back. They were checking permits. If we head south, we can find them, and they can help you better than I can." The man's expression hardened. "I don't think there was a ranger." "There was," Marcus insisted, backing up slowly. "Big guy, probably still there. Come on, we should hurry before he moves on." Marcus started walking backward down the trail, facing the man, his hand moving to the bear spray canister on his hip strap. He kept his movements casual, non-threatening, but his heart was hammering. The man didn't follow. He just stood there, watching Marcus retreat. "You sure you don't want to help?" the man called out. "The ranger can help better," Marcus replied, still backing up. "Just head south. You'll find him." Once Marcus had 50 yards of distance, he turned and walked quickly, not running. He didn't want to show fear, didn't want to trigger a chase response. But walking as fast as he could while seeming calm. He kept glancing back. The man was still standing there, watching. Then, after about 100 yards, the man turned and walked off the trail, disappearing into the tree line. Marcus immediately started running. He ran for 30 minutes straight, ignoring the weight of his pack, ignoring the burning in his lungs. He didn't care about the trail etiquette of not running and scaring wildlife. He just needed distance. When he finally stopped, gasping for air, he looked back. The trail behind him was empty. He pulled out his phone. Still no service. Marcus didn't camp that night where he'd planned. He hiked until dark, putting as many miles as possible between himself and that encounter. He set up his tent off-trail, hidden in dense brush, and barely slept. Every sound in the darkness made him reach for his bear spray. The next morning, he hiked out the remaining 12 miles to the northern access point and drove straight to the local ranger station. The rangers took his report seriously. They knew the section he'd been hiking. They said search and rescue teams occasionally found evidence of campsites in that area that showed signs of someone living long-term off-trail. Makeshift shelters, food storage, trash, someone who wasn't just passing through. They also told Marcus something that made his blood run cold. 2 hikers had gone missing in that general area over the past 5 years. Both were solo hikers. Both experienced. Neither was ever found. The rangers increased patrols, put up warning signs, but they never found the man Marcus described. No arrests were made. The missing persons cases remain unsolved. Marcus still hikes, but he'll never do that section of the PCT again. He upgraded his gear to include a satellite communicator, the device he'd lied about having. And he thinks about those 2 missing hikers. He thinks about what was in that backpack, about the rope and duct tape, about how the man's performance of being lost had been almost perfect, right up until Marcus noticed the details that didn't fit. Marcus wonders how many hikers that man approached with his lost hiker routine, how many stopped to help, how many walked off the trail with him to find his group, how many never made it back. And he wonders if those 2 missing hikers had seen the same thing Marcus had, that open backpack, that coiled rope, but only after it was too late. Solo hiking carries inherent risks, which is why many people hike in groups. There's safety in numbers, right? If something goes wrong, you have backup. If you encounter danger, you're not facing it alone. But sometimes, being in a group doesn't make you safer. Sometimes the danger is waiting for the one moment when you're separated from your friends, when you're vulnerable, when no one can hear you call for help. This next story comes from a woman whose group hike turned into a nightmare the moment she fell behind. This story comes from Jennifer Rodriguez, who was hiking with 3 friends in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee in October 2018. Jennifer, age 28, was the least experienced hiker in her group. Her friends, Lisa, Amanda, and Kate, hiked regularly and had convinced Jennifer to join them for a weekend trip. They chose a moderate trail, the Alum Cave Trail to Mount LeConte, about 11 miles round trip. The morning started beautifully. Clear skies, perfect temperature, fall colors in full display. The 4 women were in good spirits, taking photos, chatting as they hiked. About 4 miles in, Jennifer started falling behind. The elevation was getting to her, and her friends' pace was faster than she was comfortable with. She waved them on. "Go ahead, I'll catch up at the next lookout," she called out. Her friends hesitated, but Jennifer insisted. "I'm fine, just need to go slower. You're only like 50 yards ahead, I can see you." They agreed. Jennifer could see them through the trees just around the next switchback. She wasn't alone. She was fine. Jennifer took her time, focusing on her breathing, enjoying the scenery. She rounded the switchback about 5 minutes later, expecting to see her friends waiting at the lookout point ahead. But they weren't there. The trail continued upward. She must have been further behind than she thought. She kept hiking. The trail was well marked, impossible to get lost on. She'd catch up. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Need some help?" Jennifer turned. A man was standing on the trail about 20 feet back. She hadn't heard him approach. He was maybe 40 years old, wearing hiking clothes, carrying a backpack. He looked normal. Friendly smile. "Oh, no thanks," Jennifer said. "My friends are just ahead." "I haven't seen anyone else on the trail," the man said, walking closer. "Been hiking solo all morning." Jennifer felt a flutter of concern. How had he not passed her friends? They were only a few minutes ahead. "They're definitely up there," Jennifer said, turning to continue hiking. "I should catch up." "Hold on," the man said. "I know a shortcut to the next lookout. If your friends went the long way around, you could beat them there. It's just through here." He gestured off-trail, toward a gap in the trees. Every instinct in Jennifer's body screamed, "No, you don't leave the trail. That's rule number 1. Her friends had drilled this into her before the trip. "No thanks," Jennifer said firmly. "I'll stick to the trail." The man's smile faded slightly. "It's really not far. Maybe a quarter mile through the woods. Then you pop right back out at the lookout. I use it all the time." I said no thank you. Jennifer's voice was louder now. She started walking up the trail quickly. The man followed. "Don't be like that. I'm just trying to help. Your friends will think it's funny that you beat them there." Jennifer didn't respond. She walked faster, her heart pounding. Where were her friends? Why couldn't she see them? "Hey!" The man's voice had changed. Harder. "I'm talking to you." Jennifer broke into a jog. The trail was steep and rocky, hard to run on, but she didn't care. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps keeping pace. "Stop!" he shouted. Jennifer screamed, "Lisa! Amanda! Kate!" She screamed as loud as she could, over and over, while scrambling up the trail. Her legs burned, her lungs burned. She couldn't tell if he was still behind her, because her own breathing and footfalls were too loud. Then she saw them. Her 3 friends, standing at the lookout point ahead, turning in surprise at her screams. Jennifer didn't slow down until she reached them, nearly collapsing from the sprint. "What's wrong?" Lisa grabbed her. "What happened?" Jennifer turned to point at the man chasing her. The trail behind her was empty. "There was a man," Jennifer gasped. "He followed me." "Tried to get me to leave the trail with him." Her friends immediately went into protection mode. Kate, who had done self-defense training, positioned herself between Jennifer and the trail behind them. Amanda pulled out her phone. No service, but she started recording video anyway. They waited 5 minutes. No one came up the trail. "We're getting you out of here," Lisa said. "We're not splitting up again." The 4 women descended together, staying close, constantly checking behind them. They didn't see the man again. But halfway down, they found something that made Jennifer's stomach turn. Off the trail, at the spot where the man had pointed his shortcut, There were markers, small pieces of bright orange flagging tape tied to branches, leading into the woods. Someone had marked a path. Lisa took photos while Amanda stood guard. They followed the flagged path with their eyes, staying on the trail. The orange markers led deeper into the woods, away from the main trail, disappearing into thick vegetation. "That's not a shortcut," Kate said quietly. "That goes the wrong direction entirely." When they reached the ranger station at the trailhead, they reported everything. The ranger's expression grew more serious as Jennifer described the encounter. "We've had reports," the ranger said carefully. "Nothing concrete, but over the past year, several women hiking alone or in small groups have reported a man matching that description, always offers to show them a shortcut. No one has actually gone with him as far as we know." "As far as you know?" Jennifer repeated. The ranger hesitated. "There are 3 missing persons cases in this area from the past 3 years. All women, all solo hikers. We don't know if there's a connection, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. The ranger organized a search of the area where the orange markers were found. They followed the flagged path for almost half a mile. It ended at a clearing with a crude shelter, logs and branches arranged to create a covered space. Inside the shelter, they found camping supplies, food stores, and a sleeping bag. And they found photos, dozens of Polaroids, pinned to the inside of the shelter. Photos of women on trails. Most seemed to be taken without the women's knowledge. Distance shots, women photographed from behind, through trees. Some photos showed the clearing itself, empty, waiting. The FBI was called in. The investigation is ongoing, but no arrests have been made. They don't know who built the shelter or who's in the photos. DNA evidence was collected, but matched no one in any database. The orange markers were removed, the shelter destroyed, and patrols in that area were increased. Jennifer never went back to the Smoky Mountains. She has nightmares about that trail. In her dreams, she follows the man into the woods, follows those orange markers. And in her dreams, she sees what's at the end. She sees the other women who said yes when he offered them a shortcut. She sees what would have happened if she'd been alone that day. If her friends hadn't been close enough to hear her scream. If she'd been just another solo hiker with no one to notice she was missing until it was too late. Jennifer thinks about those photos in the shelter, wonders if any of them were the 3 missing women, wonders if they're still out there in those woods somewhere, or if they became something else, a warning that no one could read. The shelter is gone now, but the man who built it isn't. He's still out there, still hiking those trails, still approaching women, still offering shortcuts that don't lead where he says they do. And somewhere in the Smoky Mountains, there might be another clearing with orange markers leading to it. Another shelter. Another collection of photos waiting to be added to. The previous stories involved men acting alone, predators who saw an opportunity and took it. But sometimes, the danger on a trail is more organized, more calculated. Sometimes you encounter people who are part of something bigger. Something that makes you realize the trail you're on isn't just dangerous, it's being actively used for purposes you never imagined. This next story comes from a couple who stumbled onto something they were never supposed to see, and barely escaped with their lives because of it. This story comes from David and Emily Santos, who were hiking in the Angeles National Forest outside Los Angeles in July 2021. David and Emily, both in their early 30s, were experienced hikers who often explored the more remote trails in the ANF. This particular Saturday, they'd chosen a lesser-known trail that promised solitude and good views. They started early, around 6 a.m., to beat the heat. The trail was empty. They didn't see any other cars at the trailhead, which wasn't unusual for this obscure route. About 3 miles in, they heard voices ahead. Male voices, speaking Spanish rapidly. David and Emily didn't think much of it. Lots of people hiked these trails. But as they rounded a bend, they saw something that made them both stop immediately. There were 6 men on the trail, all carrying large backpacks, the kind meant for heavy loads, not day hikes. The men looked exhausted, clothes soaked with sweat despite the early hour. And they looked wrong, not like hikers. Like people doing labor. Hard, desperate labor. 2 other men stood with them, but these 2 weren't carrying anything. They looked alert, watchful. One of them had his hand inside his jacket. The moment David and Emily came into view, all 8 men froze. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then one of the watchful men spoke, in English, with a heavy accent. "Turn around, go back." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. David, thinking quickly, raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "Sorry, we're just hiking through. We'll pass by and be out of your way." "No," the man said. His hand was still inside his jacket. "You turn around, now." Emily grabbed David's arm. She'd noticed something the men were trying to hide. One of the large backpacks had split open slightly, and she could see what was inside. Bundles, wrapped in brown paper, bound with tape. Dozens of them. This wasn't a hiking group. This was a drug smuggling operation. "Okay," David said slowly. "We're going, no problem." He and Emily turned to walk back down the trail. Behind them, they heard rapid, angry whispers in Spanish. "Don't run," David whispered to Emily. "Just walk normal." They made it about 30 yards before they heard footsteps behind them. Running footsteps. "Go!" David shouted. They ran. The trail was steep going downward, treacherous, but they didn't care. Behind them, they could hear the men pursuing them, shouting to each other. David and Emily were in good shape, regular runners, and they had the advantage of running downhill, but they were also carrying day packs with water and supplies, and they could hear their pursuers gaining. Emily's foot caught a rock. She stumbled, but David grabbed her, kept her upright. They kept running. A gunshot cracked through the forest. David felt the impact before he heard it. A tree trunk 6 feet to his left exploded in splinters. They were shooting at them. "Split up," Emily gasped. It went against every instinct, but they couldn't make themselves a single target. Emily veered left off the trail into the brush. David continued straight, drawing the pursuers toward him. More gunshots. David was crashing through undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. He could hear at least 2 men behind him, could hear them shouting. He had no idea where Emily was, no idea if she was safe. All he could do was run and hope they were both going to make it out. David had hiked this trail before. He knew there was a service road that crossed the trail about a mile down. If he could reach it, if there were any vehicles, any people. He burst out of the tree line onto the trail. Behind him, the men were close. He could hear their breathing. The service road was ahead, 200 yards. David's lungs were screaming, his legs cramping, but he kept running. He saw a vehicle, a pickup truck, parked on the service road. 2 men standing by it, smoking cigarettes. "Help!" David screamed. "They're shooting at me!" The men by the truck reacted immediately. They jumped in the cab. David's heart sank. They were going to leave him. But they didn't leave. They drove toward him. The truck screeched to a stop, and the passenger door flew open. "Get in!" David didn't hesitate. He threw himself into the truck. The men were Forest Service workers, in uniform, with radios. "Drive," David gasped. "My wife! She's still out there. They have guns." The men burst from the tree line behind them. One raised his weapon. The Forest Service driver floored it. They sped down the service road while the passenger grabbed his radio, calling for backup, reporting shots fired. David was hyperventilating, trying to explain about Emily, about the men with backpacks, about the drugs. The Forest Service workers called in law enforcement, described the location. 20 agonizing minutes later, as police and rangers converged on the area, Emily emerged from the woods on the main trail, about half a mile from where David had escaped. She'd hidden in dense brush until the men chasing her had given up and turned back. The couple was reunited, both scratched and bleeding from branches, but alive. Law enforcement launched an immediate search of the area. They found evidence of the smuggling operation, dropped backpacks, scattered bundles, confirmed to be marijuana, though this has since been overshadowed by harder drugs in the area, footprints, even shell casings from the gunfire. But they never found the men. The smugglers had vanished into the vast wilderness of the Angeles National Forest. The DEA agent who interviewed David and Emily explained what they'd stumbled into. Drug trafficking organizations regularly use remote trails in the ANF and other national forests to transport product. They hire mules to carry heavy loads through wilderness areas where vehicle checkpoints can't reach. Armed guards accompany the mules. "You're lucky," the agent said bluntly. "Most people who stumble onto operations like this don't get away. The cartels can't risk witnesses." David and Emily learned later that 3 hikers had gone missing in the Angeles National Forest over the previous 5 years. 2 were solo hikers. 1 was a couple. None were ever found. The investigation couldn't determine if there was a connection, but the agent's words haunted them. Most people don't get away. David and Emily don't hike the Angeles National Forest anymore. They moved to Colorado 6 months later, wanting distance from those mountains, from those trails. David still has nightmares about the sound of that first gunshot, about the tree exploding next to him. Emily has nightmares about the moment they split up, about running through the woods, not knowing if David was alive or dead, about hiding in the brush, listening to men with guns searching for her. They were experienced hikers who thought they knew the risks of backcountry trails, bears, mountain lions, getting lost, getting injured. They never imagined they'd run into an armed drug smuggling operation. Never imagined that the biggest danger on a hiking trail could be other people with weapons, and no hesitation about using them. The Forest Service increased patrols in that area, but the smuggling continues. The trails are too vast, too remote, too easy to use for illegal transport. Other hikers have reported similar encounters. Armed men on trails, men carrying suspicious heavy loads, men who tell them to turn around and leave. Most hikers do turn around. Most get to go home and file a police report and count themselves lucky. David and Emily wonder about the ones who didn't turn around fast enough, the ones who asked questions or pulled out cameras or didn't run when they should have. They wonder if those 3 missing hikers are still out there somewhere in the Angeles National Forest, or if the mountains have kept their secrets, buried them somewhere in the millions of acres of wilderness where no one will ever find them. Not every dangerous encounter on a trail involves immediate violence or obvious threat. Sometimes the danger is more subtle, more psychological. The kind of encounter that doesn't make sense in the moment, but afterward, when you have time to think about what really happened, you realize how close you came to something terrible. This next story comes from a man who encountered someone on a trail who seemed friendly, too friendly, and who almost convinced him to make a decision that would have been fatal. This story comes from James Park, who was hiking alone in Olympic National Park in Washington State in August 2022. James, age 35, was an experienced solo hiker doing a 3-day backpacking trip on the High Divide Loop. Day 2, he was hiking through a particularly remote section when he encountered another solo hiker coming from the opposite direction. The man was probably in his 40s, fit, well-equipped, friendly smile. "Hey there, how's the trail ahead?" They stopped and chatted for a few minutes. Normal trail talk, weather, conditions, wildlife sightings. The man introduced himself as Eric. "Where are you headed tonight?" Eric asked. James told him he was planning to camp at 7 Lakes Basin, about 5 more miles. Eric's expression changed slightly. "Oh man, that's going to be rough. I just came from there. The main camping area is completely flooded. There was a water pipe break from the spring. Everything's swamped. Rangers are supposed to be posting closure notices, but I guess they haven't made it up here yet." James felt his plans falling apart. 7 Lakes Basin was his planned stop. The next designated camping area was another 8 miles past that, and it was already 4 p.m. He'd be hiking in the dark. "There is one option, though," Eric said, almost casually. "About 2 miles up, there's an unofficial trail that branches off to the left. Unmarked, but if you follow it for about a mile, there's an incredible clearing right by a stream. Perfect camping spot. I stayed there last night. Completely private, beautiful area." James hesitated. Going off trail went against his training. But he was genuinely in a difficult position if 7 Lakes Basin really was closed. "Is it easy to find?" James asked. "Super easy," Eric assured him. "I can show you if you want. I was planning to do some more miles today anyway, and I'd be heading back that direction. I can take you to the turnoff, make sure you find it okay." There was something in that offer that made James uncomfortable. Why would a stranger go out of their way, backtrack on a trail they'd already completed, just to show another hiker a camping spot? "That's really nice of you," James said carefully, "but I think I'll just push on to 7 Lakes Basin and check it out myself. If it's flooded, I'll figure something out." Eric's friendly expression flickered for just a moment. "It's really flooded." You're going to waste a lot of time and energy for nothing. The spot I'm telling you about is much better anyway. I appreciate it, James said, but I'll stick to the marked trails and designated camping areas. Suit yourself, Eric said. The friendliness in his voice was gone. But you're making things harder on yourself. They parted ways. James continued towards Seven Lakes Basin, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling about the encounter. When he reached Seven Lakes Basin 90 minutes later, he found the camping area perfectly fine. No flooding, no water pipe break, no closure notices. Several other backpackers were already set up for the night. James's blood went cold. Eric had lied about all of it. He immediately found the Rangers camped at the site and reported the encounter. The Rangers' expressions grew serious as James described Eric and the conversation. "Show me on the map where he said this unofficial trail was," one of the Rangers said. James pointed to the approximate location. The Ranger exchanged a look with his partner. "We know that area," the Ranger said quietly. "There is an unmarked trail there. It does lead to a clearing. But it's not a camping spot. Well, we've found things there." The Rangers explained that the area James was describing had been the subject of an investigation. 2 years prior, a hiker had gone missing from this section of the High Divide Loop. Her body was eventually found in a clearing off trail, about a mile from the main path. She'd been murdered. The case remained unsolved. They never determined if she'd wandered off trail herself or if she'd been led there. But 6 months ago, another solo hiker reported an encounter almost identical to James's. A friendly man named Eric, offering to show them a great camping spot off the trail. That hiker had declined and reported it, but when Rangers investigated, they found no one matching the description. "We think he's targeting solo hikers," the Ranger said, "trying to get them off the established trails to that clearing. We don't know if he's the one who killed that woman 2 years ago, or if he's just using the spot, but either way." The Ranger didn't need to finish. Either way, James had nearly followed a potential killer into the woods. The Rangers immediately radioed for additional support. They hiked back down the trail that night with flashlights, trying to find Eric. They searched for 3 days, combed the area, questioned every hiker coming through. They never found him. The description James provided matched the description from 6 months earlier. White male, 40s, fit, well-equipped. But that described thousands of hikers in Olympic National Park. James completed his trip with a ranger escort for safety. He filed an official report, worked with a sketch artist, did everything he could to help the investigation. But the man who called himself Eric was never found. And no one knows if that's even his real name. James still solo hikes, but something changed in him after that encounter. He's more suspicious now. More aware that not every friendly person on a trail has good intentions, he thinks about how close he came to following Eric. How easily he could have been convinced if he'd been more tired, more desperate for a camping spot, less experienced. He thinks about that clearing off trail, about what the Rangers found there 2 years ago, about whether there are other clearings in other parks, other remote spots where a man like Eric leads unsuspecting hikers. The investigation remains open. Rangers in Olympic National Park are trained to watch for anyone matching Eric's description. Warning signs have been posted about staying on marked trails. Other hikers have reported similar encounters in the 2 years since. Always a friendly man. Always offering to show them a better route or camping spot. Always trying to lead them off trail. None of them went with him. They all declined, felt something was off, reported it later. But James wonders about the hikers who didn't report it. The ones who said yes. The ones who followed the helpful stranger into the woods and never came back. Olympic National Park covers nearly 1 million acres. There are hundreds of miles of trails, thousands of unmarked paths through wilderness. How many clearings are out there? How many secrets do those forests hold? And how many helpful strangers are there on those trails, smiling, friendly, waiting for someone to say yes? The stories I've shared tonight involve encounters that could have ended tragically, but didn't. The people telling these stories are survivors. They recognized danger, they trusted their instincts, they made it out. But this final story is different. This is about someone who didn't make it out, and the hiker who found what was left behind. This is the story that reminds us why we need to listen to all the others, why we need to trust our instincts, why we need to understand that not everyone on the trail is there for the same reasons we are. This story comes from Rebecca Walsh, who was hiking in the White Mountains of New Hampshire in June 2019. Rebecca was an experienced hiker doing a solo day hike on a moderately trafficked trail. Around midday, she stepped off the main trail to take a break and eat lunch at a scenic overlook she'd read about. The overlook required a short off-trail hike of about 300 yards. It was well known to locals, but not marked on most maps. Rebecca had gotten the directions from a hiking forum. She found the overlook easily, a beautiful rocky outcrop with views of the valley below. She was settling in to eat her sandwich when she noticed something unusual. About 50 feet past the overlook, partially hidden by brush, was a backpack. It looked abandoned, weather-worn, partially covered in leaves and forest debris. Rebecca's first thought was that someone had forgotten it, but as she got closer, she realized it had been there for a while. The material was faded, and vegetation was growing around it. She opened the backpack carefully. Inside was hiking gear, a water filter, a sleeping bag, a first aid kit, and a wallet. Rebecca's hands shook as she opened the wallet. Inside was a driver's license. The photo showed a young woman, smiling, with long, dark hair. The name was Ashley Henning. The license was from Vermont, issued 4 years prior. Rebecca immediately knew something was very wrong. She pulled out her phone. No service. She took photos of everything, then hiked quickly back to the main trail. At the trailhead, she called 911. Police and Forest Service rangers responded within the hour. What followed was a massive search operation. The area around the overlook was combed intensively. On day 3 of the search, they found remains. Human remains, about a quarter mile from where the backpack was found, down a steep embankment in dense brush. Dental records confirmed it was Ashley Henning. She'd been reported missing 4 years earlier. She'd told her roommate she was going on a day hike in the White Mountains and never came home. Her car had been found at a trailhead, but despite extensive searches at the time, no trace of her was ever found. Until Rebecca discovered that backpack. The investigation into Ashley's death revealed something disturbing. The medical examiner determined that Ashley had sustained severe trauma before her death. The injuries weren't consistent with a fall or accident, they were consistent with assault. Ashley Henning had been murdered. But there was something else. Rebecca's discovery had been at a well-known local spot, an overlook that dozens of experienced hikers visited every year. The area had been searched multiple times during the initial investigation. So how had Ashley's backpack and remains gone undiscovered for 4 years in a location that was regularly visited? The investigation concluded that they hadn't been there the whole time. The degradation of the backpack and remains suggested they'd been there for about a year, maybe less. Someone had moved them. Someone had taken Ashley's body and belongings from wherever they'd been hidden and relocated them to this spot. The theory was that the killer had kept trophies, kept Ashley's belongings. But for some reason, 3 years after her murder, he decided to dispose of them. Maybe he was moving. Maybe he was afraid of being caught. Maybe he just didn't want them anymore. So he hiked them into the woods and left them where he knew they'd eventually be found, but not immediately. Somewhere they could sit for a while before a hiker wandered far enough off trail to discover them. The case remains open. Ashley's killer was never found. But the investigation revealed something that haunted Rebecca. Ashley wasn't alone. When FBI investigators went through cold cases of missing hikers in New England, they found a pattern: 7 women over 10 years, all solo hikers. All disappeared on trails in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. All in their 20s. All experienced hikers who knew what they were doing. Only 2 bodies had been recovered, Ashley's and one other, found 3 years prior in Maine. The other 5 women were never found. The FBI believes they're dealing with a serial killer, someone who specifically targets solo female hikers in remote areas, someone who knows the trails intimately, someone who's been active for over a decade, and someone who's still out there. Rebecca stopped solo hiking after finding Ashley's backpack. She told a reporter that she couldn't shake the feeling that the killer had wanted the backpack to be found, that he'd placed it there specifically for someone like her to discover, that maybe he'd even been watching when she found it. She said she still has nightmares about opening that wallet, about seeing Ashley's face smiling back at her from the driver's license photo. about knowing that this young woman had gone into the woods alone, just like Rebecca had done hundreds of times, and never came back. The overlook where Rebecca found the backpack is still accessible. People still hike there. But the Forest Service put up a plaque at the trailhead, dedicated to Ashley Henning and the other missing hikers. A reminder that the wilderness isn't always the most dangerous thing in the woods. Ashley's family finally got closure, or as much closure as you can get. They were able to hold a funeral, to say goodbye, to know what happened. But they'll never know the details of her final hours. They'll never get justice. They'll never know why she was targeted or what she experienced before she died. And the killer is still hiking those trails, still looking for solo hikers, still waiting for the next opportunity. Rebecca thinks about that sometimes. When she reads about missing hikers in New England, she wonders if the number is still 7, or if it's higher now. If there are more women out there in the woods, hidden in places where they won't be found for years or forever. She thinks about the fact that she'd hiked alone dozens of times in those same mountains, that she could have been one of those 7, that maybe she'd even passed the killer on a trail at some point, exchanged a friendly greeting, never knowing what he was capable of. And she thinks about Ashley's backpack, sitting there in the brush, waiting to be found, put there deliberately by someone who wanted it discovered. Someone who knew that a hiker would eventually wander 300 yards off-trail to see the overlook. Someone who might have been watching from the trees when Rebecca found it. Someone who might have smiled at her fear, her shock, her horror at what she'd uncovered. Someone who's still out there, still hiking, still hunting. 6 encounters, 6 hikers who made it back to tell their stories. The wilderness is beautiful, peaceful, restorative. For most people, hiking is exactly what it's supposed to be. An escape from the stress of modern life, a chance to disconnect and breathe. But sometimes, on remote trails where cell phones don't work and help is hours away, you'll encounter another person, and you'll feel something in your gut, a warning, an instinct that something isn't right. When that happens, trust it. Don't be polite. Don't worry about seeming rude. Don't let someone convince you to leave the trail, to take a shortcut, to follow them to a better camping spot. Because the people in these stories survived by trusting their instincts, by running when they needed to, by refusing offers that seemed helpful but felt wrong. Not everyone is that lucky. Some hikers don't make it back. Some disappear into the wilderness and are never found. And sometimes, years later, someone discovers what's left behind. If you've had a similar experience on a hiking trail, an encounter that didn't feel right, a stranger whose friendliness seemed off, a moment when you realized you were in danger, you can share your story in the comments below. Stay safe out there. Hike with friends when you can. Tell people where you're going. Carry a satellite communicator. And remember, the most dangerous predator in the wilderness is the one that looks just like another hiker.
Thanks for watching. Every ending hides the beginning of another tale, and ours is already on its way. Stay tuned. You'll find the next chapter right here, and soon.